My name is Melanie Swalwell. I'm a scholar of digital media arts. I've been awarded an ARC Future Fellowship, which is a 4-year fellowship where I will be researching a program focused on the history of creative computing in 1980s Australia. I think this is a vast, unmapped area which it's really exciting to be embarking on. I'm really not sure what I'm going to find. A whole lot of really exciting stuff, I imagine, going through a range of different archives and talking to a range of different people. We're running a conference called the Born Digital and Cultural Heritage, and this is a really exciting international conference where I think we'll be discussing some complex digital objects in a way that perhaps hasn't been done in this part of the world before.
To understand personal computing, you have to understand what people did with those computers, rather than just kind of understanding them in terms of their processing power and, graphics capability.
There's this really interesting moment when they first become available, when people are experimenting and casting around for ideas about what they might be useful for, from art to home use to early computer graphics and what was going on in television.
There was a particular series of personal computers that came through, in particular the Commodore 64, sort of in the mid-80s, and then the Commodore Amiga series of personal computers from the 80s to the mid-90s. And what was unique about those computers was that they were multimedia machines. People could develop what were demonstrations, or demos for short, and these demo productions were ways to show off the abilities of the personal computers, the multimedia machines.
When you had different microcomputer platforms that had really locked specifications, it was very good for the competition between the coders, because you had like the same car you could race with, right? So your skill was deciding who is better.
They were really pushing the boundaries to make these machines do things that even the makers of the machines, the original creators, they didn't think initially was possible.
Most histories of computing to date have tended to focus on, computers that had names. A whole lot of energy's been poured into that in the history of computing, and not very much into the domestic scene of when computers hit the home.
Computer games were the first applications which enables common people, non-experts, to use IT technology. I'm really interested in locating games in our wider culture, and by looking seriously to computer games, understanding what's going on within the digital revolution, because computer games are really located in the middle of the process.
Local history is quite well established within history disciplines, and yet there hasn't really been that much done on the local histories of computing. It wasn't the same everywhere. Local structural factors make a difference.
In Poland, because of the limitations, the limited amount of hardware you could get, they were augmenting the machines they already had. Floppy drives were really expensive. We were using tapes for a very long time. So they figured out a method to put more games on one cassette, which was called the turbo mode, that allowed you to create a cassette with kind of 20 games.
There are these local anomalies. I don't know what they are yet in Australia, but I'm expecting that it'll be quite interesting to investigate what the local dimensions of this history are. The 1980s doesn't seem that long ago. It's only, 30 and a bit years ago. But if we don't do it now, then it's probably going to be too late to do any research where we're looking at the material that was produced on these computers themselves.
I am mainly focusing on preserving games from the 80s, like computer games, so mostly floppy disks, cassette tapes. We give a high priority to magnetic mediums because they won't be there for long, and they require some techniques we didn't have a few years ago.
Digital material deteriorates if it's not backed up, if it's not migrated, if disks aren't imaged, they rot. There is this thing called bit rot, and it's very real. So it's important that this work happens now. Otherwise, we won't have a chance to look at our own history.
I think the thing to keep in mind is that in 2050, there will not be people around who went through the digitization of daily life. The role of the documentation, the role of the software library, the role of and particularly of the historical documentation, will be to represent, to give people something to help them understand what those transformations will be like.
Together with my colleague Denise de Vries, who's in computer science here at Flinders, I've helped to set up a computer archaeology lab. So we've been collecting early hardware and making sure that they're functioning so that we can play software on the original hardware. In year 4 of the fellowship, I'm going to mount an exhibition which will be looking at presenting this knowledge to the public in a form that summarises, I suppose, some of the significant aspects of creative computing in Australia. And I'm going to be writing a book which will set the history of creative computing in international context.